Election 2013. What does the SPD want? In the interview, SPD Chancellor candidate Per Steinbrück.
Mr. Steinbrück, the SPD is languishing in the polls at around 25%. Are you discouraged?
No. If you think back to the 2002 or 2005 elections, the Conservatives were polling at about 48 to 50% beforehand, but 30 to 40% of voters only decide in the final days or weeks how or if they'll vote. And here there's a greater potential for the SPD. So opinion surveys can't predict the outcome of September's vote.
How can you move out of the defensive?
By setting the agenda and making Chancellor Merkel realize that although she isn't strenuous for voters, she gives the air of being carefree, many realize that things are out of kilter in this country. Over 7 million people earn less than €8.50 an hour. Many municipalities are hopelessly in debt. Our education system is too rigid. Many parents, particularly single mothers, are in desperate need of daycare for their children. And then there's the question of Germany's future role in and for Europe.
What role is that?
It needs to be a more constructive one. Chancellor Willy Brandt once said, "We want to be seen as a country of good neighbors." When I talk to our European partners, I get the impression we've lost that.
But you've agreed to practically all the measures and proposals put forward by the government. So what mistake has been made beyond those things?
For us, it wasn't about supporting the government or Merkel, but about reliability. The mistake came early in the spring of 2010, when the decision was taken to focus only on crisis management and more austerity, while forgetting to provide economic stimulus. There should have been assistance with structural reforms and a much more ambitious banking regulation system. In many cases in the Eurozone, the problem wasn't public debt, but a banking crisis.
Should we have reached out to these countries more, Greece, Spain, Portugal, to explain to the public there the need for reforms?
We've underestimated the efforts that these countries are making. We Germans are sometimes quite arrogant. If we just take the spending cuts that Greece and Portugal have had to make, it's about 6% of their annual economic output. If we were to apply that to Germany, it would be about 150 to 160 billion euros a year. What do you think would happen on our streets if German politicians went on TV and said, "We're going to cut 150 to 160 billion euros in 1 year from federal, state and local government budgets"? But that's what we're demanding of these countries.
So no possibility of launching an information campaign, although it might be necessary.
I wouldn't rule that out. I'm not saying these countries should move away from consolidating their budgets, but I believe the extent to which that's being required puts some countries in a vicious circle.
Does the EU need to move forward as well?
Yes, but that's more a medium-term project. The short-term focus is stabilizing the Eurozone. But in the medium term, we need to strengthen the European Parliament and clarify the role of the European Commission. Right now, it's both legislative and executive. And then, what is the role of the European Council? Will it one day be a second parliamentary chamber? And why do we need 3 presidents?
So you wouldn't create a 4th president for the Eurozone?
Definitely not. We now have a Commission President, Mr. Barroso, European Union President, Mr. Van Rompuy, and the rotating presidency that changes every 6 months. No one can understand the system. Why don't we just amalgamate the 3 and have the president elected by the European Parliament, as we do under our national constitution?
It's now clear that Germany has been spied on. Is that going to impact relations with the US?
Yes, despite our friendship and the need for partnership, which no serious politician here in Germany would deny. But just imagine, negotiations are underway for the transatlantic free trade agreement, and the question comes up, are the Americans listening in on our preparations? That's a question that we not only need to ask, but that the Chancellor should be urgently seeking an answer and a solution for.
How do you do that?
By proceeding in a similar way to Gerhard Schröder in 1999 with the Echelon scandal. He got written confirmation from the Americans that German law and German interests were not being infringed upon. That also covered economic espionage. Have we made sure that German firms that are ahead in their field technologically are not being spied on to their detriment?
Russia's becoming increasingly authoritarian. Should we change our approach?
I don't think tough rhetoric achieves much. You need to keep the door open to these countries. It was the same with Willy Brandt's policy of rapprochement with the Communist East. Of course, he knew there were human rights violations in East Germany and the Soviet Union, that they were anything but democracies, but he wanted to keep the lines of communication open, believing change would come through rapprochement.
Does that apply to Turkey? The SPD was always in favor of Turkey joining the European Union at some stage. How should we deal with Erdogan's Turkey?
We need to be as open and frank as we have been in recent weeks, with clear criticism of the unacceptable use of violence against demonstrators. These demonstrators are standing up for rights that are part of the European Union's canon of values. The right to demonstrate, freedom of expression, and freedom of the press, too. These rights have been infringed upon, and that's bound to affect membership negotiations.
The SPD has celebrated a truly rare anniversary this year. 150 years as a democratic party. What hope or promise of happiness is the SPD offering voters in this campaign?
The same as throughout the 150 years. The definition of justice has perhaps changed over the years, but it's still important.
Opportunities for all?
Of course. There's hardly a country in Europe with an education system that provides as little opportunity to advance as ours. Statistics still show, and this is not just SPD propaganda, that the qualifications that school leavers gain are significantly dependent on their parents' social status. Then the labor market is split. You have many people who are working full-time but don't earn enough to live on. There are city governments that can no longer fulfill their responsibilities, that are forced to shut down public facilities, including those looking after young people. Cities that may have deprived areas with lots of problems where parallel societies are developing. We may not be fighting for a welfare state anymore, but are we retaining an effective welfare state in this time of demographic change? These are the same values that the SPD has always stood for.
Many people, Social Democrats included, have risen to success because society allowed them the opportunity and because there was a successful education system. So what went wrong and when?
It didn't go wrong, but our society has changed. With the pressure of competition through globalization and demographic change, we don't have the same conditions as we had 10 or 20 years ago. Conditions on the labor market are much tougher now. Labor has been devalued. And, clinging to neoliberalist values, we believed that the market would straighten everything out. And suddenly we realize society is drifting apart. It's no longer so certain that society will hold together in the way it did 20 or 30 years ago.
Is that an inevitable trend, this individualistic and egoistic society, in Germany too?
I can't accept that. Nothing is inevitable. But when you get a recognized intellectual, conservative-leaning newspaper like the Frankfurter Allgemeine producing a book entitled Ego, then I think that's an indication. When a German historian like Hans-Ulrich Wehler writes about how the distribution of wealth in Germany is clearly moving towards a two-class society, then I think that's an indication. Something is happening which not only Social Democrats are noticing, but also other observers and commentators in our society.
Is it something that comes from German society itself or through globalization?
You can't pin it down to one thing, but perhaps we need to activate the public spirit again, promote awareness of the common good in order to counterbalance this ego trip. I feel we SPD members are heirs of the social market economy. Chancellor Merkel speaks of a democracy that conforms to the markets. That is an incredible conception of democracy. What does it mean? That democracy should adapt to calculations of cost and benefit? We want a market economy that conforms to democracy, that is subject to our perception of democratic sharing and participation.
Mr. Steinbrück, when we look at this country from the outside, we find it's very popular. Our social and political development is also widely recognized. And there are many who consider Germany almost exemplary, somewhere they'd like to live. In 1972, Willy Brandt's election campaign slogan was, "Germans, you can be proud of your country." Election campaign aside, can Germans be proud of their country?
Definitely, but they shouldn't be blind to the problems of the present and the challenges of the future. And these things exist. I don't accuse Merkel's government of failing on details. My problem is that she glosses over it all, like lulling everyone to sleep. You're right, we are popular. I'm not sure Germany's crisis management in Europe has scored as well. I don't think it has. But Germany and the achievements of the German people are certainly respected right now. That's not something for us to get annoyed over. That's something we can be pleased about.
Mr. Steinbrück, thank you for talking to us.
Thank you.